Chapter 5, the last thing I'll speak to here. One size does not fit all. On the net, everything scales, or at least it's supposed to. Digital technologies are biased toward abstraction, bringing everything up and out to the same universal level. People, ideas, and businesses that don't function on that level are disadvantaged, while those committed to increasing levels of abstraction tend to dominate. By remembering that one size does not fit all, we can preserve local and particular activities in the face of demands to scale up. And this becomes a big piece of everything that I've been talking about, the influence on the individuals, small businesses, both. There's an expectation for us to scale. And this touches, like, when I talk about corporations hoarding all the benefits of technology, this is an example of that. The individual is expected to scale up with the technology, but they're not receiving the benefits there. And that's just one piece of it. The real issue here is that we're not even acknowledging that we're forcing everybody to scale up, and that's not something everyone is suited to do. And so by bringing that into our consciousness, we can remember to build out multiple sizes, different fits for people. And that's something I really want to advocate, right? Which is, we're creating this digital landscape that is increasingly designed for specific types of people to be successful. And it's increasingly, every aspect of our life is like that. And so the same people who benefit in one area are benefiting kind of across all of these areas. Economic, socially, intellectually, all of these different things, because these are designed in a particular way, and they have, right, it's a networking effect that kind of gets reinforced. Only particular people can thrive, and locality is disadvantaged in all of this. And I'm going to get into this from the beginning because it's one of my favorite quotes of all time now, but it speaks perfectly to the point that I've been making about local businesses. Real world companies have always generally had the choice of whether they want to remain at the mom and pop level or to become a chain or franchise, essentially going into the business of business. Like, we've always had that choice to just remain a mom and pop shop. And that choice isn't even available anymore. You have to scale up. And that's a problem. But so he talks about this example of Tom, the owner of a small music shop in New York. And he had a student build him a website and soon found that the website, the transactions were less expensive than the ones that he did in real life. He didn't have to maintain a physical store and didn't have to purchase any stock or pay shipping. So describing a drop shipping model, basically. And it was so successful that he encouraged his customers to do the shopping online, and even had added a computer to the store to do online checkouts there. Eventually, he got rid of the shop altogether and moved completely online and started a blog component in tandem with it. But then came shopping aggregators, these programs that sweep through the internet for the best prices on any product, and started selling those products. This is like an Amazon or Alibaba, AliExpress, Temu, right? They're undercutting, it's predatory pricing, right? Undercutting to drive out competitors. And then the end result is price hikes, but that's not really the point here. His prices were good, but he couldn't compete with the chain stores. This is something Amazon, Walmart have famously done, and it's that's the disadvantage for local businesses, right? They can't get that bulk pricing. And when his offerings showed up in the same list as other stores, but his were just like a couple of dollars higher, even his loyal customers went elsewhere. People still read his blog, but they bought from his cheaper, bigger competitors. The fact that he was no longer a live human interacting face-to-face with another community member didn't help the matter. So Tom's error wasn't just that he closed down his sustainable local business is that he couldn't scale. On the internet, everything is occurring on the same abstracted and universal level. Survival in a purely digital realm, particularly in business, means being able to scale, and winning means being able to move up one level of abstraction beyond everyone else. So the music retailers that could scale effectively survived the internet. The companies that went up a level and aggregated those music retailers triumphed. Real-world companies have generally had the choice of whether they want to remain at the mom and pop level. We talked about that. And that begins, the sort of slow shift begins with the introduction of malls in the 70s, and then by the 90s we introduced this really global competition, and big chains could outsource production and get their costs way down and put them in malls, put their products in malls. So it's really hard to compete at that level. But then also going online denies people, local businesses, their remaining competitive advantage, the human relationships and local connections. Because the net is occurring on a single, oversimplified and generic level, success has less to do with finding a niche than establishing a vertical or a horizontal. Going vertical means establishing oneself as the place to do everything in a particular industry, the one-stop place for hardware or cycling needs or home electronics. Going horizontal means to offer a service that applies to every category's transactions, like the company that made the credit card transaction software for websites. In either case, scaling up means cutting through the entire cloud in one direction or another, becoming all things to some people or some things to all people. My side note here on the vertical versus horizontal distinctions and this sort of mindset just seemed like a long-winded fancy way or alternative way to say monopoly. That's really what you're talking about. Like, you want to, even if you're a small e-commerce store, the business practice that you're engaging in is like trying to monopolize a sector, right? That's your aim, and you kind of expect to not hit that. But that's baked into the system, and that's sort of our mentality about the whole thing. The craftiest online business people have come to realize that neither of those strategies is perfect. Both vertical and horizontal businesses face competition from their peers in an increasingly commodified landscape. It's almost impossible to establish a foothold that can't get undercut by a tiny shift in the price of one component. So instead of going into business, these players become search engines, portals, or aggregators, rising one level above all of those competing businesses and skimming profit off the top. In an abstracted universe where everything is floating up in the same cloud, it is the indexer who provides the context and direction. Amazon did that. They consistently do that. Walmart does that. And to just express what we're talking about here, right? Like, Amazon's going to do the shipping thing because then they get to determine the pricing for shipping, right? And it also becomes a source of something, a potential revenue stream, right? It's another way of describing this, and using vertical and horizontal, both literally vertical integration, I think is what it's called, is a topic in antitrust law. And so you're trying to acquire, it's anti-competitive behavior, definitionally well established. You're trying to occupy as many parts of your business, product cycle as possible. So then you're the marketplace, right? You're the online resource, you're the checkout service, you're the financer, you're the marketer, you're the product developer, you're the shipping and logistics, all of those things, right? They're owning all of these different parts of the product life cycle. That's anti-competitive, right? That needs, a healthy market needs each of those things to be owned separately. But of course, this logic dovetails perfectly with a financial industry in which derivatives on transactions matter more than the transactions themselves. So this section becomes critical. So Listen up. Once the financial world came to understand that its own medium, central currency, was biased in the interests of the lender and not the producer, every business attempted to get out of the business it was actually in and scaled up to become a holding company. Thus, great industrial companies like General Electric shed their factories and got involved in capital leasing, banking, and commercial credit. Meanwhile, those who were already in banking and credit moved up one level of abstraction as well, opening hedge funds and creating derivatives instruments that won or lost money based on the movements of economic activity occurring one level below. And then even craftier speculators began writing derivatives of derivatives and so on. And I'll say that the existing bias of business toward abstraction combined with the net's new emphasis on success through scale yielded a digital economy with almost no basis in actual commerce, the laws of supply and demand, or the creation of value. It's not capitalism in the traditional sense, but an abstracted hyper-capitalism utterly divorced from getting anything done. In fact, the closer to the creation of value you get under this scheme, the farther you are from the money. Huge mic drop. That's critical. Please consider this. So many things that we could address here, but the point is, each of these companies, they're realizing once you hit a ceiling, in order to scale up, you have to increase a level of abstraction, and you're becoming a degree further removed from the actual work. And central to most of the economic theory that we've aligned on to this point has established that the value of anything is tied to work. It's tied to labor. That's labor theory. And we're so divorced from labor in terms of value that it's all made up. It's all abstracted pricing. And that's why our home prices are so insane. It's because it's not tied to labor. It's not tied to anything real. And I guess maybe that's the best way to describe it. When we do this, when we operate in this way and we become increasingly more abstracted, when you are making money by speculating on the ability of other companies to make money and so on, those people aren't doing anything real. And the people who are doing the real things are the furthest removed from where the money is going, where the money is flowing. There's a contradiction, a wrench in the flow of money and labor here. That's not nothing. That's not just the economy doing something. That's a structural flaw, and it's going to need to correct. So either we can address it and course correct, or there's going to be a crash because it's unsustainable otherwise. And it speaks to, so many different things. The General Electric one is a great example. It's something that other intellectuals have addressed and used General Electric specifically. They're not making good products anymore. They're a financial they're so financialized. And the financialization of everything, it represents the abstraction of what the thing actually is. And it's why there's been a degradation in product quality, sometimes intentional. It's why corporations, a place like Home Depot or Lowe's, despite record-breaking profits and executives seeing increasing, astonishing wealth, their average employees are overworked and underpaid. Furniture products totally degrading in quality. So that's all tied to this idea. But new theories of internet economics abounded, each one depending on another misapplied principle from chaos math, systems theory, or even biology. The emergent behavior of slime mold becomes the justification for the consciousness of the market, and fractal geometry is misused to prove that the economic behavior occurring on one level of society is mirrored on all the others. And this is the thing that forced me to like step back and consider the way I see things, because I do abstract concepts frequently. And so I just ultimately what I'm trying to validate is I think that I'm doing it correctly. I think that he's speaking to a specific experience or way of doing this that is distinctly different than what I'm doing. But I don't have the words to describe that yet. And so it's going to be important for me to determine that. So, and then just the more subtle levels, abstraction forces us to rely more on familiar brands and trusted authorities to gain our bearings. So like tourists in a foreign city, when they see a Starbucks or something, it helps them get grounded and makes them feel safe or whatever. They're like signposts. Yeah. So activism means finding a website, joining a movement, or liking a cause, all of which exists on a plane above and beyond their human members. Learning, orienting, and belonging online depend on universally accepted symbols or generically accessible institutions. Likewise, achievement is equated with becoming one of those universal symbols yourself. Like the digitally oriented activist is no longer satisfied with making something real happen where they live, but rather they're dedicated to building the website that solves the problem for everyone. Everyone wants to have his or her model of change scale up to host the website where the most important conversation takes place, or aggregate the Twitter feeds of all of the people one level below. And so again, this speaks to, and really trying to make sure I'm tying this into the main point, which is the platforms are biased towards abstraction, right? And so the bias there, it's preventing us from doing a real thing, where we get the sense of doing a real thing, but it's really an abstracted process. Language is an abstraction of the real world, where sounds represent things and actions. It requires a tremendous amount of agreement so that the same words mean the same thing to different people. Text is an abstraction of those sounds, with little squiggly lines now representing the mouth noises that compose the words that represent real stuff. Over time, the way those letters look is standardized so that the written language becomes increasingly universal and applicable. And then it gets into like written words separates the speaker from his words, yada, yada, yada. The printing press standardized text, but it disconnects the author from the page. And then digital age brings us hypertext. That hypertext disconnects us as well. And then he talks about this guy, Walter Benjamin, a German philosopher of the early 20th century, that wrote a seminal essay about the way photography and other reproduction technologies change our relationship to art. And so like a film photograph versus a digital photograph, like you experience the photograph differently based on the type. So that's because like the reproductions or the copies or the prints are divorced from the actual context that it was created or exists. But yeah, so the reproduction is profane imitation. So by recognizing the abstracting bias of digital technologies, we can use it to our advantage. Digital abstraction does occur still one further level removed from what we think of as reality. While games and math might be abstracted representations of our world, our digital simulations are abstracted representations of those games and mathematics. In a world as filled with representations as ours, it's easy to get so entranced by signs that we lose sight of the here and now. And this is where he talks about the postmodernists, which I just thought was interesting. So as the postmodernists would remind us, we have stuff, we have signs for stuff, and we have symbols of signs. What these philosophers feared was that as we came to live in a world defined by more symbols, we would lose touch altogether with the real stuff. We would become entranced by our simulated reality and disconnect from the people and places we should care about. And so that gets, that makes me think about simulacra and simulation, and you can't engage with the naturally, the protected nature reserve but they created a model of it, and you can engage with the model, but you'll never get to actually experience the real thing. So we keep creating simulations of simulations, and everything becomes meaningless, and we lose our humanity. Postmodernism, though, nah, that's not it.